Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue. Je vous invite à vous asseoir. Ne restez pas derrière comme ça, debout. Prenez siège. Il y a du café, il y a de l'eau, j'imagine. My apologies if I'm a couple of minutes late. I was on other duty this morning. Alors, bienvenue à tous. There is simultaneous translation available, headset, if you wish. I would say fewer in French, but do my presentation mostly in English, and I think, Naser, the panel will work in English today. It will indeed. So, bienvenue à tous à cette séance intitulée L'ère numérique et l'avenir du travail, Digitization and the Future of Work. My name is Jean Lebel, and I am the president of the International Development Center, le centre de recherche pour le développement international, qui est une société d'État basée à Ottawa qui investit dans le savoir, l'innovation et les solutions visant à améliorer les conditions de vie dans les pays en développement. Nous existons depuis près de 50 ans et nous avons une étroite relation avec le ministère des Affaires mondiales du Canada. Nous collaborons avec des partenaires aussi pour veiller à ce que les collectivités les plus marginalisées aient accès aux technologies et aux connaissances et aux possibilités dont elles ont besoin pour réussir dans un monde qui évolue rapidement, je dirais même qui change constamment. The approach is directly linked to this session. The very nature of work is undergoing fundamental shifts, fueled by an increasingly automated, data-intensive, and connected globe. Some see a new industrial revolution underway, characterized by a series of remarkable converging technology, clever software, more dexterous robot, 3D printing, and a range of web-based services. Now, let me just go off script over here. 3D printing, seems to be doing a lot of, talk, and, sometimes we have difficulty at what 3D printing will do for those that are not expert. I had the misfortune of slipping from the rooftop of my cottage last summer. I broke my hip, went to surgery, got screw metal plate, then my femur collapsed, got a prosthesis, a pin, a ceramic ball, a cup. Now I have an orthesis, I'm limping. Well, in 15 years from now, when I'll go back to surgery to replace the prosthesis, it is highly unlikely that it will be a prosthesis. It will be a new bone made of a material that is biocompatible and that will be printed with 3D printing. So this is what's lying ahead of us in some of the transformation that will affect our daily life. This trend is dramatically changing the nature of jobs. Many jobs that exist today will not exist in 2050. These changes may have profound ramifications for developing countries that may not be able to use low-cost manufacturing as a competitive advantage. La question qui se pose est la suivante. Comment les pays en développement peuvent-ils maximiser les possibilités et atténuer les risques au milieu de cette révolution numérique? Les secteurs de la recherche et l'intervention jouent un rôle essentiel. Nous sommes au cœur de ces interventions au CRDI. Nous devons transmettre des connaissances et favoriser un apprentissage visant à soutenir de nouvelles structures et institutions, ainsi que de nouveaux procédés. Nous devons orienter les populations dans le monde afin qu'elles puissent profiter d'une transformation rapide, tout en les protégeant des risques, mais fondamentalement en tenant compte de leurs aspirations, de leurs désirs et de leurs capacités pour mener à bien cette mission. Il faut aller au-delà des chambres parlementaires et des salles de conférences et atteindre les usines, les marchés, les foyers. Nous savons que les compétences numériques sont essentielles pour faire en sorte que les populations marginalisées, particulièrement et souvent les femmes et les jeunes filles, comme nous le rappelait la ministre Bibeau ce matin, dans les pays en voie de développement, particulièrement celles-ci, pour qu'elles puissent saisir les possibilités économiques que cette nouvelle révolution apporte. However, I like this word in English with an H. However, we don't understand nearly well enough what works and what doesn't in terms of building those skills. To help fill that gap, IDRC is working in Haiti and Egypt to train hundreds of women and girls to build digital skills. And we are making sure that successes can be replicated in other developing countries. For instance, the curriculum and training in Egypt will be the first Arabic language course material created for the purpose of building digital skills. This material can be replicated to train thousands of women and girls across the Arab region. We are committed to using this successful model and our experience to build evidence on the future of work for developing countries. Aujourd'hui, nous aurons la chance d'écouter des chefs de file étudiant ce domaine. Demain, à Ottawa, pour certains d'entre nous, nous approfondirons cette discussion grâce à un atelier de 2 jours sur la numérisation et l'avenir du travail. Nous tentons présentement, et cette conférence nous donne l'opportunité de débattre avec vous, de définir un programme de recherche sur l'avenir du travail orienté sur le développement et nous envisageons de démarrer un nouveau réseau consacré à cette question sous peu. So, thank you for being here with us this morning. Thank you for our panelists for having come to Montreal at a conférence de Montréal. And without further ado, and in asking them to share their experience with concreteness and good example, I would like to introduce our moderator today, my friend and Director of Technology and Innovation Program at the International Development Research Center, Mr. Naser Faruqui. He leads a global team localized here in Uruguay, in Kenya, in Egypt, and in India. That global team focus on helping developing countries harness science, technology, and innovation for sustainable and equitable development. It is my pleasure to welcome today with us Naser. Je vous souhaite tous une discussion très productive et écouterez avec attention vos délibérations. Naser, up to you. Merci beaucoup et bienvenue encore à cet atelier.
Merci. Merci, Jean, et bon matin et bienvenue. The session is going to be videotaped and will be uploaded on IDRC's YouTube channel. So if you can't find something on Netflix you like tonight, then you can always watch this session again. So I first came to the Conférence de Montréal about 10 years ago. And back then, if we had had a discussion on how technology may be changing the nature of work, the panelists might have cited a very well-respected book whose authors maintain that driving in traffic is insusceptible to automation because they said that, and this is a quote, executing a left-hand turn in oncoming traffic involves so many factors that it's hard to imagine discovering a set of rules that could replicate that driver's behavior. 6 years ago, in 2010, Google announced the driverless car. So there's significant benefits to this accelerating technological change. For example, we've already seen artificial intelligence successfully predict autism in babies with over an 80% accuracy, predicting skin cancer with over a 90% accuracy. And of course, digital innovations are changing the way that people can earn income. The sharing economy, for instance, or find employment through online platforms for outsourcing work. But at the same time, we've seen significant losses of jobs due to technology, not just in manufacturing. For instance, companies such as Kodak, which employed 45,000 people in New Jersey alone in its heyday, have been replaced by applications like Instagram that have a similar market capitalization, but only a fraction of the employees. A widely cited study by Oxford University researchers in 2013 suggested that 47% of the jobs in the US were at risk from automation. Last year, the OECD released a report saying that across its 21 member countries, 9% of the jobs were at risk from automation. And earlier this year, McKinsey released a report saying that, in fact, it's not really entire occupations we should be talking about, but tasks within those occupations. And it suggested that many tasks are ripe for automation, but that jobs are more likely to be transformed than eliminated, and that at this stage that only 5% of jobs are completely at risk. So obviously with such divergent figures, there's more questions than there are answers. And moreover, not a lot of the studies look at the developing world. where some suggest that the impact of automation and robotics could be even more significant than it will be in the developed world. This is a growing area of research for IDRC, as Jean mentioned, and so we thought it would be opportune to bring a set of experts together to discuss both the benefits and risks of digitization in the future of work. So let me introduce our panelists. To my immediate left, we have Henry Su, who's an economist and associate professor at the School of Economics at University of British Columbia. And his research focuses on automation and the decline of middle-class jobs. He has served as a visiting researcher at the Federal Reserve Banks of Chicago, Minneapolis, and St. Louis, as well as the Reserve Bank of Australia and the Bank of Canada. Next, we have Sebastian Siseles, who's a lawyer and entrepreneur with an MBA from the University of Pittsburgh. Sebastian is director of international at freelancer.com, which he defines as the eBay for jobs. And Sebastian is responsible for Freelancer's international expansion strategy and consolidating its presence and growth in both developed and emerging markets. Next, we have Helena Barnard, who's a management scholar and a professor in the business school at the University of Pretoria, where she focuses on innovation and international business. During the last 3 years, she's been involved in an IDRC-funded project to understand the development implications of online work in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, the Philippines, and Vietnam, as well as in sub-Saharan Africa, in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. And last but not least, we have Hernan Galperin, who's a sociologist who studies digital inequality in development contexts. He's currently associate professor at the University of Southern California and a director of the Regional Dialogue for the Information Society and ICT Research Network. And for the last 2 years, Hernan has led an IDRC study looking at online labor markets in Latin America. So the panel is going to proceed as follows. In the first half hour, the panelists are going to do 5-minute lightning presentations. We'll go through them one after the other. The second half hour, I'll engage the panelists in a discussion to elaborate on their points. And the third half hour, I'll open it up to all of you so that we can have a good collective discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Henry to kick us off. Henry?
All right, thanks so much for having me. In the next few minutes, I'll just overview my perspective on digitization, automation, and the future of work. And so to make sense of the future, I think it's helpful to have some understanding of the past and present. And the history or story of economic progress is one of us enlisting animals and machines to help us with our work. We used horses to pull our carts, oxen to plow our fields, machines to wash our clothes, and websites to book our travel. And so I think there are kind of two important takeaways from this process of automation and economic progress. The first is that it represents, true human progress. It's made us much more productive. It's freed us from the drudgery of having to plow and clean, and allowed us to pursue other work, creating new job opportunities and making us immeasurably better off. The second important takeaway is that this automation has had an uneven effect on employment and job opportunities. So while the vast majority benefit, some workers are made worse off. So automation creates winners and losers. And in my research, I study the impacts of automation on today's workplace. And in the past 30 or 40 years, this has been driven by advances in industrial robotics, personal computing, and information technology. And unsurprisingly, this current wave of automation has created winners and losers. It's disproportionately negatively affected what economists call routine occupations. So these are occupations that are focused on a relatively narrow set of tasks, and tasks that can be well described as being rule-based, following instructions, so rule-based and repetitive. And this has been happening in the US, the UK, Canada, and really throughout the industrialized world. And so what this means is that these routine occupations are disappearing. And obvious examples would be, machine operators and production workers on the factory floor in the manufacturing sector. That's an easy one to identify, but perhaps equally, if not more important, has been the loss of office and administrative support jobs. And these jobs are located in all sectors of the economy. So, we're doing more and more work, but we're doing it with fewer secretaries, data entry keyers, mail clerks than before. And so to give you like an example of the numbers, if we were to look, between the 1980s and today, the American economy has added about 60 million working-aged adults. But these routine job opportunities have not kept pace. In fact, it's done the opposite. While the workforce is growing, the number of people employed in these occupations has shrank by about 5 million. And so in the research that I do with my colleague Nir Haimovich, what we show is that this process is actually changing the nature of economic recessions and booms. So this long-run trend in terms of the disappearance of routine jobs, this isn't a smooth and gradual process. In fact, essentially all of these job losses occur in short, sharp bursts, events that we call recessions. And so what happens is in a recession, routine jobs are lost, but then they never come back, even after the economy recovers. And so what my work shows is that this has actually changed the way economic recoveries look. It's given rise to this new phenomena, you've probably heard of it, it's given rise to the jobless recovery. And in other work that we've done and others have done, we show that this long-run decline in routine job opportunities and the rising or the falling labor force participation rate amongst working-age American men, these two phenomena are intimately connected. They're flip sides of the same coin. And as you probably know, these routine occupations, they're by and large middle-class jobs. So automation is the primary factor in the decline of the middle class that we hear so much about in political and social discourse. And it's also an important contributing factor to the widening of income inequality that we see within industrialized economies. So now, looking to the future, it's obvious. Looking to the future, it's obviously hard to predict what the workplace will look like. But in the next 5 to 10 years, automation, digitization, it's going to come in the form of advanced robotics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. And this means that its effects on the workplace are going to push beyond the routine and into more complex occupations. In fact, we're already seeing it in fields like journalism, law, finance, medical diagnosis. But unlike routine jobs, which focus on a small number of tasks, these complex jobs tend to involve a wider variety of tasks, many of which cannot yet be automated. And what's more, workers in complex jobs tend to be more educated and more adaptable. So rather than being replaced, it's more likely that these jobs will see something akin to an evolution, where routine tasks, those tasks that can be easily digitized, will be offloaded, and these jobs will shift their emphasis towards more innately human tasks, those that require creativity, mental flexibility, curiosity, and interpersonal and social interactions. And so that's what I'd like to begin with.
Thank you very much, Henry. In fact, that was an excellent overview and historical perspective, which I think sets us up well for continuing the discussion. So, Sebastian, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to share a stage with these outstanding individuals. I'm Gen X. I'm 40 years old, and that means that when my grandparents joined a company, they did it for life. They worked their whole life for the same company. My parents, instead, they probably worked, 20 years for the same company before resigning and setting up their own business. My generation, Gen X, we've spent an average of 8 to 10 years working for the same company before switching jobs. And when we see now the millennials, the Gen Y, they spend between 3 to 5 years in the same company and decreasing. Do you remember the movie Modern Times with Charles Chaplin? There are 3 characteristics there. The way he worked was from 9 to 6 or more, based on physical output and individualism. If we fast forward to the future, let's say 2017, we can see that the way we worked has changed dramatically. Mainly, we are based on intellectual output, based on collectivism, and no more 9 to 6 or 9 to 7. We like more flexibility. And this is what millennials are bringing to the new way of work. They don't want a 9 to 6 workday. They don't want to be in an office the whole day. They do want a work-life balance. I can see many people saying yes. In freelancer.com, that, as Naser said, we are like a sort of eBay for jobs. We connect companies of any size with a worldwide talented workforce that can provide services for these companies from any place in the world. That's why that around 74% of our 24+ million users are millennials, people between 18 to 37 years old. Number 2, we cannot deny that software is everywhere nowadays. If we want to connect with a friend or reconnect with a friend, we use Facebook. If we want to share our thoughts, we can do it in 140 characters using Twitter. If we want to buy something, we can go to eBay, Amazon, Alibaba, Mercado Libre in Latin America. If we want to hire somebody, we can use Freelancer. And if we want to find the love of our lives, we can use Tinder. All of this is software. When Freelancer.com launched in Brazil, as an example, back in 2012, only 35% of the Brazilian population had access to internet. Nowadays, more than 50% of our 200 million plus people have access to internet. This is connectivity. So these 3 macro trends, millennials joining the workforce, software is everywhere, and connectivity is changing dramatically the way we are used to work. Many of you might be thinking, Isaac, to work via internet, we need to have skills, we need to have knowledge. And yes, the answer is yes. But it has never been so easy to learn a trade. How can you do it? Super cheap or free? Where? Going to the internet. And also, this might sound too techy for you, right? Or that I'm just speaking about digital jobs. How many of you knows Julius Yego? No one. Julius is a sportsman from Kenya who competed in the Rio Olympics last year. As you know, in Kenya, they are like a really good people, like running in the marathons or 10K or 5K. And they always win the gold medals there. But Julius, he wanted to compete in javelin. So there was no support from his country. He didn't have the money to pay a coach to train him. He was a millennial. He used the internet. He connected to the internet. And he learned a trade via YouTube. He learned via YouTube how to throw the javelin. The result? Silver medal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for bringing us that private sector perspective, which we're going to get into a bit more. I wonder if Tinder is helpful to find the love of your life or just the love of your night, this particular night. But we can quibble about that later. Thanks so much, Helena. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. The project that Naser spoke about is one that I do with the Oxford Institute for the Internet about trying to understand what it is like to do work online. And we interviewed almost 150 people across the 6 countries that he mentioned to understand the experience. And in one of the interviews that I conducted in Cape Town, the woman said that she's learned to pretend that the camera on her computer is broken every time she starts a new job, and explained to us that the first time that she interviewed with a new client a few years prior, he had asked her to take off her jacket, which she did, not being sure why, and then proceeded to ask her to take off her shirt. Now, I'm quite sure that no man would be subject to that kind of harassment, but it's unfortunately not an isolated incident. The evidence is mounting that women are really struggling with discrimination and harassment on the internet. The Guardian, the UK newspaper, did an analysis of the comments to stories, and they found that white men had fewer negative comments and less vicious comments than writers who were either women or people of color. And this really makes me wonder about the future of women in a digital workplace. As Henry says, work is changing, and we need to start. The jobs that will remain are the jobs that require social skills and emotional intelligence and the ability to work in a consensus-building way, which are all skills that historically we associated with women. And women were the ones who were supposedly more emotionally intelligent and so on. But I'm concerned, and I think that we cannot take for granted that the progress that has been made in terms of women's rights will remain in a digital workplace if we don't think seriously about what it will take to keep that progress and to further advance it. And there are 3 reasons why I say so. The first one is I think we sometimes overstate the differences between men and women. Yes, we differ, but we also know from socialization that we develop the behaviors that get rewarded. So once upon a time, you were rewarded for being a forceful decision maker who just made a call and went with it. And as we move into a space where you need to be a consensus builder, men will develop the skills of seeking and building consensus. So I don't think it's an inherent advantage of women. Secondly, we know about the feminization of work, which is that there seems to be a tipping point. Women can join a field, but as soon as they start becoming beyond a certain percentage, the field itself loses status. People start to earn less. And this happens across levels of skill, and even across in the same job in different locations. So in Russia, for example, the tipping point has been crossed in the medical profession with doctors. So although doctors in Russia are seen as professionals, they're not particularly high status professionals compared to, for example, in North America, where the doctor population is more mixed. And then finally, the reverse is also true. The moment men start entering a profession, it gains in status. And I think perhaps the best example of this is with the early history of coding. I don't know who of you have seen Hidden Figures, the movie recently, but it tells the story quite nicely. When computers first came around, if you were game for it, please join us and help figure us out what to do. And women were very well represented and played important roles in coding in the early history of computing. But as the field settled and there were formal qualifications and industry bodies and standards, women became pushed out to the point where today we don't think of IT as a field where women are particularly sort of well represented or where they even belong. I think it's important to say that digitization doesn't cause discrimination of any type, but it also doesn't make it go away. And in fact, the evidence is that it may amplify the beliefs that are already present in a society. So I think that as we battle with the many uncertainties of what digitization brings, we need to be very mindful about creating a workplace in which women can take their rightful place.
Thank you so much, Helena, for reminding us about the particular risks that marginalized groups, including women, face in this digitizing world. And I'm looking forward to getting more in depth in that in the discussion. Hernan, last but not least, please go ahead.
Thank you, Naser. So when you buy property, real estate agents will tell you 3 things really matter: location, location, and location. And for a long time, the same was true for work. Location mattered a great deal because it determined the job opportunities that were available to people. Job markets were by and large limited by geography. And one of the implications of this is what we call the spatial mismatch problem. That is, there were workers in one location, they were willing to work, they had the abilities required by the employers, but the work was located somewhere else. And for a variety of reasons, labor mobility was restricted, so they could not easily move to where these opportunities were available. And this mismatch happened all over the world, but was particularly evident in developing countries. Over the last 40 years, we have an enormous expansion of higher education and college graduates in the developing world that has not been matched by a similar expansion of the job opportunities. So the result has been a lot of young graduates that cannot find work that match their training. Today, thanks to the internet, thanks to the revolution in digital technologies, many people think that the spatial mismatch problem is a thing of the past. Geography will no longer determine your job opportunities because workers are able to work remotely from anywhere in the world and compete for jobs regardless of location. And this is exactly the vision that Thomas Friedman put forth in his famous book, The World is Flat. According to Thomas Friedman, the world is flat because the internet has made every job in the world contestable. That every worker in the world is able to compete for my job, for your job, no matter where he or she is located, no matter the nationality, and in fact, no matter the age or the gender of the race. All that really matters in this new world of work is, according to Friedman, is your ability. Now, I think Friedman got it right in many ways, and labor markets today are flatter, location matters less and less, but he did forget, and he did ignore, that labor markets are also very sticky because they depend on information, they depend on trust that's embedded, that is built into human relations. And this is what is making the digital economy much less inclusive than it can be. We know from many years of research that employers are risk averse, that hiring involves always an informed guess because you can never directly observe in advance the ability or how hard a worker is willing to work. So the common strategy in the past for an employer was to hire within a limited social network, either or his or her own or of their workers. Now, thanks to the internet, employers today have the ability to search and hire from a larger pool of workers that is not limited by geography or by the social networks. However, in our research in Latin America, we find that online employers hire on the basis of heuristics, which reproduce many of the biases that we observe in traditional hiring. And let me give you 2 examples. In one of the findings, we find that workers from developing countries are penalized both in terms of the odds of winning contracts online as well as in the wages. And the combined penalty is as high as 42% when you compare to a similarly qualified worker that is based in a developed country. And another really interesting finding has to do with the gender dimension. When women are the ones that are contracting online, so they're looking for workers online, they receive bids that are 22% higher than when men work for similar workers online. So women entrepreneurs are paying a premium to hire workers online. So online work has opened many opportunities for people, especially young workers with higher education, with technical skills. What we call attention in our research is that this is not a panacea for workers in developing countries, and it's not a panacea for women or for racial minorities, because the gig economy is not immune to the dynamics that play against them in traditional labor markets. So in conclusion, what we call attention is that the gig economy must not reinforce these dynamics, and that the changes that are happening in the labor markets need to go hand in hand with new forms of social safety, social protection, and also a commitment from private sector to help create a digital economy that works not just for some, but for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hernan. And I was reflecting on your point that women employers pay a premium to hire others. I think it's also true that when women bid for work, they offer to do the work for less than men do. But I'm looking forward to discussing that further in the panel. All right, so let me pose some questions perhaps to some of you on your particular presentations to elaborate on some of your points, and then we'll get into some broader themes that are emerging: gender, inclusion, skills, etc. Henry, what's different about this industrial revolution than past ones?
That's a great question. I think there's still some debate whether or not this is, something that we should be calling an industrial revolution, but let's go ahead and think that way. I think what's particularly different about this current wave of automation and digitization is the characteristics or the identities of the winners and losers. So, if you were to go back to the first British Industrial Revolution of the late 1700s, early 1800s, the story that we remember from there is this Luddite movement, the idea that handloom weavers, who were at the time highly skilled, highly paid artisans in the textile industry, these people were smashing machines that were replacing the work that they do. And so that mode of automation was one that hurt the highly paid to the benefit of the middle and lower class. If you were to go to, for instance, the beginning of the 20th century, we knew how to make automobiles, but automobiles were really, really expensive because of the way that they were made. They were essentially handcrafted by teams of highly trained men, 3 or 4 men, who built a car from the ground up, from the very first bolt all the way to, I don't know, the last coat of paint. And what happened there was, electrification and the ability to generate mechanical power allowed Henry Ford to introduce into his automobile plant the moving assembly line. And so rather than an automobile being built by 5 guys from step A to Z, it was then, automobiles were produced with many, many, many men who each, rather than doing all the jobs, just did one job at a time. And this made automobiles much cheaper. This led to the, the way that we travel around today. And also, that gave birth to this, storied or fabled American middle class. It took these, production opportunities away from the highly paid and gave them to the lowly paid. In fact, this is what allowed, American immigrants at the turn of the 20th century, the Italians and the Irish and the Polish, these are the people that formed the American middle class that we know of up through, the middle of the 20th century. So, historically, technological change was a force that shrank inequality. And I think what's new today is the fact that, we already discussed, is that the current wave of automation is actually disproportionately affecting the middle class. And it's actually hollowing out the income distribution and creating this polarization towards, more job opportunities at the high end and also more job opportunities at the low end. So I think that's one of the things that's quite different about the current industrial revolution relative to past.
So past revolutions may have reduced inequality and enhanced inclusion, and the opposite may be happening now.
Yeah, and we don't know how long this current wave of automation will last, and we don't know, the direction of technological change is something that is, very, very hard to predict. But currently it seems that this is the nature of what we're experiencing.
Okay, good. Let's come back to this point about inequality and how to address it, hopefully forestall it. Sebastian, I think that your presentation piqued the interest of a lot of people, but I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit. So, you know, the freelancer.com, who are the people who are applying for jobs on freelancer.com? Who are the those who are offering employment? Where, you know, which countries? What are the nature of the tasks that are being performed, and how much money are people earning?
Okay, cool, thank you. Well, in terms of, let's say, the supply side, as I mentioned, more than 70% of our users are millennials, people between 18 to 37 years old, people that are like natives on digital matters, that they were born and raised using a computer. So it's natural for them to start working using internet, using a computer. On the demand side, although we are open to any kind and any size of company, the most companies that are using us are small, medium enterprises. Why? Because they don't have to go through all that bureaucracy that a big company has to hire somebody, right? So for entrepreneurs, startups, small, medium enterprises that need to hire a talented person anywhere in the world, this is a solution. Because if not, they need to go and compete in the labor market against Google, IBM, Amazon, or whatever, who can pay more to full-time workers. Nevertheless, we have huge companies and organisms using us. For example, NASA. NASA is turning into freelancer.com to look for talent for things like design, a new patch for some enterprises they have, not a new logo for NASA, no, but yes, for projects, specific projects that they have, they turn into freelancer to look for talent. Or maybe just a robotic arm to be put on the space, in the space. So again, it's open for any kind of company, but the small, medium enterprises are the ones that are like having the best success here. And in terms of jobs supplied and demanded, nearly the 70% of the jobs are IT related. Programming, HTML, PHP, apps for smartphones. And then as we started like internationalizing our company and going to other languages, to other regions, to other countries, we opened the skills that can be offered in freelancer.com. So design, communications, and marketing are like having like a great growth within the site.
So we were chatting yesterday, and I mentioned that you're pretty optimistic.
Absolutely.
About digital innovations and the opportunities for people around the world. Mm-hmm. To what extent can people in developing countries participate in freelancer.com? And what about the concern that these kinds of platforms disproportionately enable those who already have digital skills? What do you do about that?
Well, in freelancer.com, we see that the cross-border transactions, meaning employers from one country are hiring people from other countries, is the thing that happens the most. The USA actually is the #1 employer on our site, and then we have Canada, UK, Australia, and India. On the supply side, we have millions of people from India, but also from the US. So it is not about, I usually receive the question about how can a freelancer from US or Canada compete against someone from India, Bangladesh, or Philippines, because of the wages, because of the effects that happens, that the disparity on the effects and wages. And at the end of the day, everything is about quality. Everything is about reputation. It doesn't matter whether a freelancer or a worker is located in India, Argentina, Brazil, or the US. What it matters at the end of the day is the quality of his or her job. It's like when you go to eBay and you want to buy a mobile phone. Will you go to the cheapest one? Or will you go to the seller that has the best reputation? Absolutely. You go to the seller that has the better reputation on the site. Why? Because you are buying a phone. So just imagine that you are trying to hire somebody to help you to launch or grow your business. You will not hire the cheapest one. And we have data that supports that.
Thanks, Sebastian. So Helena and Hernan, you've both been studying online platforms for jobs as well. What's your perspective, Helena?
On
the opportunities in particular for marginalized people or for people in developing countries in general to participate?
It's a complex matter, because one of the things that struck us when we were doing the interviews was how many of the people seemed to be in some kind of a transitional phase in their life. They were about to immigrate, the one woman was waiting for a kidney transplant, the one was a student who had just finished studying, was hoping to find a full-time job, and it included people from different sexual orientations, religious minorities, women, and it does open up opportunities for people who are somehow at the margins, but all of them seem to want to get into the mainstream economy. We had very little of what you're saying of people for whom this was a preference. We had that, but there was also a sense that it was a safety net that was catching people who were being marginalized by society. And we're very ambivalent about whether that's good or bad, because the problem is these people didn't have medical insurance through the platform. They weren't paying taxes through the platform. So it felt like the online equivalent in some cases of working at McDonald's for a while until you've settled out. So we're not sure at what point does it start becoming a real job that you do in order to earn a living. It is offering opportunities. Many women were commenting that they were able to take care of children and still earn some money, but they were not commenting about big money. I don't know your work.
Our work has mostly been based on examination of large data sets. We collaborated with a company that's now part of Freelancer. But we also had some qualitative interviews. And in fact, we hired people to talk to us on Freelancer, or actually in the platform that now is part of Freelancer. And we talked to a number of people, and there's a number of amazing stories of people being able to really, for example, in Venezuela, as you know, the Venezuela economy is pretty much in disarray. It's been for many years, and many people, highly qualified people, mostly millennials, young people with higher education degrees, software developers, people doing translations and all kinds of work that have been really able to survive through Freelancer because, again, the local economy did not offer opportunities. So there's many, many examples. Now, those examples are restricted to people that already have the skills that are required on those platforms. So we are going what used to be a spatial mismatch to a skills mismatch, because if you don't have the skills, and as Sebastian said, the skills that are required to do the IT work, the software development, web design, so all these require skills that, yes, many young people are developing and have, and this is creating incentives for these people to develop in emerging regions. But there's still a large number of population which the skills are not there, and this is certainly not creating opportunities for these people.
So let's talk about that issue about education and skills building. I understand that Singapore has developed a program where they give $500 to all of their citizens initially, and they're thinking of ramping it up, sort of as a voucher, which they can cash in at over 500 sort of service providers, and some of them are MOOCs or online courses. They can take them at vocational institutes and so forth to sort of move to this idea of lifelong learning. You don't just get a degree at the outset of your career and that's sort of it, but you're going to continue to have to reinvent yourself, develop new skills throughout your career. what is needed? I mean, that's one example, but I'd like to hear from all of you of how do we protect people going forward? How do we protect the losers, you know, that you had talked about, Henry, going forward? And how do we reinvent our education and skills building systems to adapt to this new reality? Will a degree from Harvard make the difference? Are credentials or badges that you earn from taking sort of particular courses more important? Henry, let's start off with you.
Yeah, so I think that really the key here is the idea that as we move forward, clearly the complexity or the amount of knowledge that we need to have to thrive in the workplace, you know, that's clearly increasing. And so I think one of the things that we need to do, especially, you know, when we're thinking like at the primary school level, is as opposed to developing simply developing, for instance, mathematical or analytical skills, we need to shift the way in which we teach these skills more towards, you know, as an example, you know, if you're in grade 3 or grade 4, you're probably learning what a fraction is or how to do long division. But as opposed to simply, you know, emphasizing the procedural aspect of mathematics and analytics, we need to develop something more of a kind of a foundational knowledge base. Like the reason why you do division is so that you can apply it to these sorts of problems. And so if you were to look at, you know, a mathematics textbook, I remember when I was growing up, you know, you might have 25 questions on long division, 24 of them are straight rote performance of the operation, and only one of them, the last question, is an applications type question. So I think that the way that we educate needs to be one where we start emphasizing to a greater degree why it is that this skill is necessary, in what realms is it useful in terms of this conceptual knowledge building. And I also agree that, you know, with the amount of knowledge that we need to have to take into the workplace ever expanding, people need to learn that, you know, learning is indeed a lifelong process. And so one of the things we need to do is instill in children a fundamental curiosity, a fundamental desire to ask questions, and that fundamental, you know, what economists call non-cognitive skill, these are the skills which beget further skills as people go through their lives. And, you know, hopefully this is the sort of thing that, you know, reinforces to individuals that, you know, it's not enough simply to turn off your brain at the age of 21 after you've graduated from college, but you need to continue to, you know, do things that stimulate learning.
Hernan,
Yeah.
Helena.
I'm South African, and we've got an unemployment rate of close to 40%. So the government is desperately trying to find jobs for people today to keep the country literally from going up in flames. And we can, for example, create call center jobs. Now we have a tension. It's not a wealthy country, and we have an immediate crisis of getting jobs to people. Do we prepare people for the more routine tasks that we are at the moment relatively well placed to offer because we have cheaper labor? Or do we invest for a changing economy that's going to hit us, nobody knows when, at some point, and start working on problem-solving skills and end up with 40% of unemployed people who are really good at asking questions? So I think this is a challenge from a developing country perspective. We have limited resources and big social problems. The education system needs to anticipate the changes. We don't know when those changes are going to happen. And in the meantime, developing countries are penalized for saying we will do the value-added thinking work, and that's not what the role is in the global economy. Our job right now is the routine tasks. It will disappear. We know it will disappear. So it's a big area of concern for me.
Let's explore that issue of the different types of skills that are necessary a little bit more. So, you know, some are suggesting that, you know, as we go forward, so the optimistic view is that the machines will do the dirty, the heavy work, the hard work. You know, caregivers, for instance, will be able to lift people up out of their beds, but then the caregivers can focus on some of those human skills that are important, empathy, nurturing, and so forth. That's one aspect of a subset of skills, and another could be more on the creative thinking, the critical thinking sorts of skills that are necessary to ask questions and so forth. What type of training is going to be required to nurture those kinds of skills? Hernan, what do you think?
If I may pivot this question, Naser, I think skills training and development is critical. Now, we also think that it's also critical to find new mechanisms to validate those skills. And what we see in online employment is basically the employers see candidates and they see two types of information. They see information that's validated by the platform, mostly about reputation, comments and stars and ratings that are associated with past performance, and those are all validated by the platform. And there's also the information that the worker is voluntarily providing the platform. Now, of course, you can say that you can program Python and you can do all those things, but if the employer doesn't believe you, that's no good, even if you actually have those skills. So developing skills is part of the problem, but it's also finding reliable mechanisms that those skills are validated and they're also transferable from one place to the other. So you don't have to start from scratch when you are looking for a job in a specific context, and then you have to go to another context and you have to start from scratch. So it's important there are mechanisms, that there's certification mechanisms that validate those skills for the workers.
Sebastian, you were talking yesterday about tests that are available on your platform that will validate to a certain extent whether people have skills that the employers are looking for. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, definitely. Firstly, as I was telling in my presentation, out there in the internet, you have so many courses that are free or cheap to improve your skills or to earn a new knowledge. It's like there's Khan Academy, Udacity. Like you have so many courses that are related to the new creative economy, that are skills that you can earn and learn for the new world that it's already here. So, so yes, I agree with my colleagues here that as Henry said, like improving, getting new knowledge skills, it's critical. In freelancer.com, we have like a sort of education side where we provide tests that the people can take. So there are not easy tests for a range that goes from English, Spanish, programming, specific languages in programming. So you can take the test, and if you approve them, we can put like a badge on your profile. So the people that will hire you or is looking to hire you know that you are you have a proficiency in that specific skill. So that this increases your chances of getting hired for that specific skill.
Okay, good. So audience, I'm going to turn it to you in just a few minutes. I just want to explore the subject of gender a little bit more and women with the panelists. And I'm going to start with you, Helena. You talked about some of the risks that women face participating in the digital economy. What is needed to maximize the benefits for women and reduce the risks?
I think the most important thing is awareness. What happens is, in many ways, the rules of the game are being rewritten. We spoke last night and said we're going back to piecework. The salaried employee is gone. We are back to the industrial revolution, pre-industrial revolution. You do your piece of weaving and you get paid per piece. But we have a century plus of worker rights and women's rights that were worked for. And I think as we hit the reset button to be mindful of the fact that what have been the safeguards that have been put in place. So we know that something like affirmative action was just keeping track of what are you paying people of different genders or different races, what's your pattern of hiring, just an awareness of those matters, I think can help us to counter some of these unconscious biases that I think very few people deliberately set out to discriminate against a person online. But the fact that it's online, we know from a lot of research we behave worse online. So we see an amplification of the dysfunctions that are in the bricks and mortar economy.
Other panelists want to come on in on this question? Hernan?
I want to emphasize what Helena said. I think there's a lot of research that says that the things that you would say in an online forum, you would not say in a setting, in a flesh and bone setting. And some of that is transpiring in online employment and in the gig economy in general, that we see some amplification of gender discrimination and other forms of discrimination. And on the one side, those platforms are so transparent, particularly from of course, from perspective Sebastian can see from inside, that you can actually see that happening, that you can visibly see this dynamics happening. But on the other hand, I think there's a number of ways in which we can identify the problems and try to address those problems. That in trying to make sure that the gig economy does not amplify the opportunities for this type of discriminatory behavior, in terms of gender, but also in terms of race and nationality and so forth.
Yeah, I think it really is a significant risk that that women may drop out of the digital economy when they're being harassed so much online. IDRC is actually, as an aside, we're starting up a new research network on what we're calling Internet 5, the idea of an internet that can achieve sustainable development goal to actually move towards gender equality, which is really, really risked by the massive harassment that's happening online. Henry, you mentioned something yesterday about the way that women are actually adapting their skills, perhaps in contrast to men.
Yeah, so my research is kind of contrasts to the research of Helena and Hernan in the sense that my work tends to focus on industrialized economies, so especially in the U.S., and not necessarily in terms of work that's being done in the gig economy or online, but in more kind of macroeconomic, the typical setting. And what we've found that's happened over the past 30 or 40 years is that there's been a real convergence in the employment opportunities of women vis-a-vis men in these, high-paying, intellectually, cognitive-oriented occupations. So if you were to look at, very, very narrow or precise occupational definitions, what you see is that the representation of women in these occupations is essentially has increased in essentially all of those occupations. There are a small number of exceptions. One that was already mentioned was the fact that the occupation of computer programmer is now more male and less female than it used to be. But in essentially all other occupations, women are becoming more and more represented, and this is also being reflected in the phenomenon that we know of as the female wage gap. We know that there is a female wage gap. Women are paid less than men, but over time this gap has shrunk. And so one of the things that my colleagues and I are working on is to try to understand, well, how much of this is fallen discrimination? Clearly, a big part of it is a fallen discrimination, but we also are finding that the reason why women are faring better and better relative to men in these high-paying occupations is the fact that the economy is increasingly rewarding social and interpersonal skills. So these skills like the ability to listen, the ability to communicate, the ability to conduct yourself with empathy, the ability to read, not just verbal cues, but nonverbal cues. These skills are becoming more valued in the workplace insofar as it matters for these high-paying jobs. And as Helena said, there's social reasons, but also, neuroscientists and psychologists would claim that there are also kind of biological reasons to think that these skills are, to some extent, inherently feminine, and that is contributing to these gender trends that we see in the U.S. and industrialized workforce.
That's promising. That's a glimmer of light, and I can see Helena thinking and saying she wants to come in on that. But I think what I'm going to do is, in the interest of time, I'll open it up to all of you now in the audience. I'll ask you to identify yourself briefly and ask a concise question. And we'll take a few questions at a time and have the panelists respond to them. And I imagine there'll be somebody here that can hand, the microphones. I see the gentleman on my left. So please, the floor is open. So there's a lady in the front.
Hi, my name is Diane Bérard. I'm a business columnist. I'd like to know more, Henry, about those high-paid job or good job that women are getting more. Could you be more explicit about what jobs you're talking about?
Yeah, so, an obvious example is perhaps the highest paying occupation that you can identify in large governmental data sets. The most high paying occupation would be that of the physician and surgeon. And there's no doubt, we could see it all around us, that the chances of finding, or your ability to find a female doctor is much greater today than it was back, say, in 1980 or 1970. And so this is an occupation where clearly there have been female gains. And what, as we were saying, what we think is part of this is the fact that perhaps, in the 1970s or 1980s, if we had a malady, if we had an illness, we were simply looking for somebody who was competent and who could tell us what was wrong. But as the economy has become more and more educated, there are, it's an increasing fraction of the population has a college degree. That means that there are increasingly more and more individuals in our economy who have the inherent ability to become a doctor and to act as a physician or surgeon. So one of the hypotheses that we have is that whereas, back in the day, you were simply looking for competency, what you're looking for in a doctor now is not just competency, but you're also looking for somebody who has good communication skills, who has a good, I think the phrase in medicine is called a good bedside manner, someone who can actually understand the issue that you're suffering, the way those symptoms manifest themselves in your day-to-day life, and perhaps can do more than just prescribe you a drug, but also provide additional information that you would find helpful in solving your physical ailment. So I think that's an example.
Thanks, Henry. I don't know about the rest of you, but I've always been looking for not only a doctor, but also a doctor's receptionist that has a nice bedside manner. So let's take a few more questions from the floor. So there's one in the back, and we will take a few and wait for the panelists to respond, because sometimes themes emerge, and it's good to do it that way.
Hi, my name is Mohammed. I'm a student finishing my master in IT, and I'm an entrepreneur. Well, actually, with technology, I find that the work has some kind of evolution, and it is more complex in a way that you have to gain harder skills. You have to increase your knowledge and your teaching, your learning, to be able to work in today's work market. And I noticed that if you go on a digital job board, LinkedIn, Job Boom, Monsters, and you see the kinds of jobs and the demands of the companies, the respected companies, they are asking for more and more professional certificate. For an example, if you're in finance, they will be asking for CFA, a lot of them, a big majority. If you're in project management, they'll be asking for a PMP. If you want to work in IT management, implementing IT solutions, if they are working with agile methods, they want you to have an agile certificate, a Scrum, and I can go on like this until tomorrow morning. But I find that the problem these days is that our traditional teaching institutions are not aligned with the demands of the work market, meaning I could have an IT master degree, but no one will be able to know what I can really do. So the companies, that's why they are asking for Agile, Scrum, PMP, SaaS, Cisco certificate partners, Microsoft certificate partners. If they have a network, Cisco network, they don't want to pay you extra money in order to train you. So there's a big gap between our schools, our universities, and what the work market demands. Professional certification are oriented on best business practices, and schools aren't really. So I'm sorry if it's a bit long. It's maybe not really a question, it's more a commentary, but I'd like to have your opinion on that.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Aman. So there's another question just in front of Aman.
Hi, my name is Eric. I work in finance. And I just have a question, maybe more going back to automation and to get your opinions on it. But I think traditionally there was this idea, this theory that as things got automated and humans were liberated from more of the process-oriented type of work or menial tasks, that we'd have more free time or leisure time or whatever it is. And so the first part of the question is, has that actually occurred? Or is it these people now don't have a job and there's problems that come from it? And then the second thing is, as we go into the future, what this holds for the future. And maybe I'll just orient it with an example that we see all around us. So call it self-driving cars or the whole transportation and logistics industry. What's going to happen if in 10 years there are no taxi drivers, you don't need to drive, you don't even need to have a postman because you can have a drone deliver a package to you. So I guess the question is, this automation, while it's a risk, it's a threat, it's an opportunity, do we view it more of a glass half full, glass half empty, and where do we see it going?
Thank you very much. Other questions? There's one in the front here, please.
I just want to add to the first question.
I'm sorry, you need to use the microphone so that the translators can hear you. The microphone's coming to you in just 1 second.
Hi, I'm Claudio Tuna, and I work for the government for employment and social development. So I want to add to the question of one of my predecessors. I think what he meant to ask, and I want to add to that, are universities and other institutions of education, but also governments, basically playing catch-up. In that respect, I wonder whether you, as academics, researchers, and also being involved in the digital economy, have any suggestions or requests from universities and government. Thank you.
Okay, so let's take these three to start. So that there's one question on education and professional certificates required, and universities or other teaching institutes not being aligned to that need. But more broadly, as the gentleman just said, are governments and other institutions keeping up with the pace of change in terms of regulations and changing policies? Who wants to come in first on that question? Helena?
I want to just comment in terms of the comment about the master's degree versus certificates, and that's Henry's point around what are we preparing people for. So I work at a business school, and we're very clear in our mind that if we prepare people to deal with today, we're going to shortchange them. 5 years ago, emerging markets was the savior of the economy, and now we sit that 4 of the 5 BRICS have been junk status. So we have to get to fundamental questioning skills, creative thinking skills, the things that Henry has mentioned, but then what is our responsibility in terms of immediate employability? And I think that tension has to be constantly managed. And on top of that, we have the fact that education itself is being disrupted by digitization. And I don't know if that was what you were wanting to come in with, so why don't I hand over to you?
I think those are great questions about this balance between the more immediate demands of the labor market and preparing people for their entire career, 30, 40 years down the road. And I think every institution, every higher education institution is struggling with that question. My perspective is that of a very large research university in the United States, where we focus more on basic skills that are not just relevant for tomorrow's or today's job market, but really what we think is going to be relevant 30, 40 years down the road. So for example, I teach statistics, and I don't teach my students a specific, I don't teach a specific program or SPSS or STATA or R or some of the big data. I teach just fundamental statistics. So whatever the program they want to choose, some of the skills they have to develop on their own, and there's many opportunities for that. Now, some of my colleagues don't agree with me. I have to admit, some of my colleagues think that we should be teaching more to what employers are demanding today. So I think many institutions in higher education are struggling, but also I think we've seen a segmentation of institutions. So my institution, as a large research institution, has a different perspective from a small community college in the Midwest, which has a different population, has different expectations from their students. So I think there is also not a single answer for every higher education institution, university.
Sebastian or Henry, you want to come in?
I just want to add, Aman is your name, right? Sorry. So I completely agree with him. Like the gap is huge. If you see, and moreover in developing countries, what universities and schools teach us is for jobs of the 20th centuries. And companies nowadays are demanding people who knows skills for the 21st century. So there's a talent of crisis, a crisis of talent on the both sides. People who have learned and have studied for years, and they are looking for jobs, and they cannot find it. And on the other side, you have companies going into this digital wave, digital new world, looking for specific skills that they cannot find in the market. So that's why big universities, really well-known one, like are struggling, and they are offering new courses, or like people are attending to online courses to learn these skills and get a job in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. You know, there's what universities and post-secondary institutions are good at doing is delivering to you a suite of courses which then can be bundled together to form a particular type of accreditation, a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, and these take 4 years of time, 2 years of time. Some master's degrees take 1 year of time. These are large investments in time that allow you to obtain the accreditation that you can then put on your LinkedIn site or on your CV and display to potential employers that, hey, I have some skills here. And so, but clearly, the accreditation of these skills does not have to come through a university degree. As Sebastian was saying, like many skills can be literally verified or, indicated through reputation or through the performance of specific tests or tasks that then become part of the online employment platform. And I think that this idea that employers want evidence of skills, the accreditation of whether or not the worker has those skills is a place where there's an informational mismatch. And I think this is one of the places where I know that the university I'm at, the University of British Columbia, is a partner in this online education platform called edX that was, I think, started by MIT and Harvard, and now there are many, many partner universities, where the idea is not to provide you with coursework that would take you a year or 2 or 4 years to complete, but small online courses which will then have an accreditation that is backed by the fact that, well, these are reputable universities providing this this education. And so I think that there is a role for universities. There is a space that universities can fill, and whether or not particular universities want to do that is up to them, but I do think that there certainly is value to those sorts of education plus accreditation at a more micro level. I think that there's space for that.
Okay, good. I'm sorry. I think we have one question still to respond to, and we just have about 5 or 6 minutes left, so I'm going to encourage conversation in the corridor afterwards. But I actually think that the question that the gentleman asked is a nice one to end on, because you know, the question was, you know, one, are we reaping a dividend from this in terms of having more leisure time? I don't know. I certainly don't feel like I'm living in the Jetsons kind of world, and email at least has made me busier, not less busy. But let me ask the panelists, one, that part of it, but more philosophically, I think, is the glass empty or half full? What's your sense of optimism or pessimism for the future? Let's start with Hernan.
Well, my first reaction, Naser, is you know, we tend to, the future is so difficult to predict, and we tend to remember the predictions that turn out to be true, but we forget all these predictions that turn out to be wrong, because this is how we work. So it's inherently difficult to say, well, are we going to be better off? Is there going to be more employment? Is there going to be less discrimination for different minorities and so forth? I think there's a lot of reasons to think that we are entering a new age of opportunities, that the job markets are becoming more transparent, they are becoming flatter, they are becoming more open than they were before. You don't need to belong to a social network to get a job, which used to be the case. You don't need to go to Harvard, Yale, or the University of British Columbia, because the opportunities are wider, and you can get a certificate on a specific programming language and become very successful with that certificate if you're good at programming that language. So I'm fairly optimistic. I do see, and I think that those changes, there is no point in trying to stop those changes are happening. But I do see, and I emphasize in my research, that we also have to be remember and cognizant of all the people that are struggling, of the people that were traditionally marginalized from labor markets, then they continue and maybe even more marginalized than were before. So we need to reinvent some of the mechanisms to make this economy, the new digital economy, more inclusive.
Good, thanks, Helena.
I think it depends on what world you live in. So my husband is doing a PhD on mobile health and using cell phones to improve the delivery of health services in developing countries. And he went to do his field work in a rural clinic, and the woman was very nice, the nurse who was the head of the clinic, explaining how the app worked. And at the end of it, she said to him, are you going to write a report about this? And he said, yes. And she said, could you put in the report that we would really like running water for the clinic? We do 5 deliveries of babies every month, and we don't have running water, and it really complicates matters. And it feels to me that as we process this, and is it good or bad, it is what it is. We're finding ourselves in a very rapidly flowing river, and we need to stay the course. But I think it's not wise to think that this is now the whole of reality. This is one way in which business is changing, the delivery of government or education services is changing, but there are many other things that are old challenges that still need our attention, and human beings are not changing, not that much at least.
Thank you, Helena. Sebastian, last word from you.
What I see here is we are in a special moment of time where 3 generations all together are in the labor market. We have baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials, maybe in the same company. So how can you make understand a 65, 70 years old person who is used to work, going to the office at 8 a.m. and spending all the day there, that a millennial wants to work from home during the night and go to the supermarket, to the gym, or during the day, right? So they will say, this is a lazy person. He's having too much time of fun. The automation or whatever. No. It's a clash of cultures that the companies that can see it, handle it, and manage the 3 different worlds that people is living in, the companies that can handle this will be the companies that can succeed in the future.
Adapt. Yeah, adapt or die. Okay, Henry, last word from you.
Yeah, so I think the spirit of the question was, you know, as we move forward, is it true that we're going to be able to enjoy this life of luxury where computers and machines will do the work and we'll be able to enjoy, you know, unlimited leisure time? I think, you know, thinking about this in kind of an historical perspective, I think, again, is helpful. You know, if we were to go back to the 1800s in a country like Canada or North America, retirement age was death, and you worked essentially, you know, every waking hour of your day out in the fields or manufacturing or whatever it was that you're doing. And of course, over time, what's happened is that retirement ages have come earlier and earlier, and the amount of time or the average work week that we spend at work as opposed to at play, that's fallen as well. And so technological progress, automation, digitization, this is the fundamental engine that's driven this improvement in human quality of life. And I think that, you know, looking forward, I think there's no question that the economic pie is going to continue to grow, not just within industrialized countries, but even if you look at the globe as a whole, the economic pie globally is going to continue to grow. But I think what we need to be cognizant of is the fact that inequality within industrialized economies, inequality is growing. So what that means is that the share of this growing economic pie is increasingly becoming concentrated within certain individuals. And so there are clearly, you know, individuals who get left behind, who are enjoying lots of free time, but that's not the luxurious, you know, Jetson type of free time that we want to think about. That's literally time on the sofa, perhaps wishing that they were working. And so I think what we need to do as a society is to, you know, come to terms with this increasing inequality, at least within the industrialized world. And we need to, you know, if as a society we think that these increasing gains should be spread, should be shared, this is where governmental and political action, that's why we have those institutions set up, is, you know, one of their fundamental jobs is to share the wealth of the pie around. And so that's a big social question.
Thank you very much, Henry. So let's move to wrap up. I cannot do justice to such a rich panel in terms of a summary, but I'll just highlight very briefly some of the themes that I thought emerged. There are definitely some benefits to digitizing economies, as Hernan was mentioning right at the end, you know, maybe more accessibility, more transparency, more people able to participate. At the same time, there are significant risks, as Henry just said, in terms of inequality, the impacts on women, other minorities, and it's difficult to predict the future. I understand that there was a private artificial intelligence conference earlier this year that was closed, and one of their conclusions was if somebody tells you they know what, you know, the future is, and these are the top artificial intelligence thinkers on the planet, if they tell you they know what's going to happen, then they're kidding themselves or they're kidding you. So we really don't know. We have some idea. One thing that kind of occurs to me is that and I thought it was well said by last year's World Development Report on digital dividends. And conclusion was that we're not actually seeing all of the benefits that digital innovations could give us in terms of education or entrepreneurship or governance or growth, et cetera. And that is because we cannot ignore the analog complements to digital dividends. And those complements are exactly what Henry just said. I mean, they're about regulations that even playing fields and protect those who are more marginalized. They're about helping develop workers' skills to adapt to the new technology. And they're about accountable institutions. institutions that are there to protect us. And if there are some people that are completely going to fall out of the market, then social safety nets and redistribution and income and so forth will I suppose, be part of that. Certainly education and rethinking education in terms of lifelong learning, but also moving towards hybrid models of more formal and informal education, more academic, but also applied in terms of professional certificates and so forth came up as a theme. And certainly the need to pay attention to marginalized groups, in particular women and other minorities. So IDRC is very, very interested in this area, and as my president said just at the outset, we're actually developing a very large research network looking at these issues, because so much of what we talked about a bit, the developing world, but much is unknown about what's happening in the development world on this area, and I'm looking forward to the participation of these experts in that network. And I would say to you, all of you, stay tuned because we will be following this closely, as all of you will as well. I would like now to ask you to help me thank the panelists, because I thought they did an absolutely tremendous job, and I certainly learned a lot. I hope you all did too. Thank you very much. The session is closed.